what is artificial intelligence? So AI is a collection of many different technologies, but most people were introduced to it through ChatGPT. The trajectory of AI development that led us to ChatGPT has continued since ChatGPT, and that is specifically Silicon Valley. Scale at all costs approach to AI development. AI models in modern day, they are trained on data. They need computers to train them on that data. But what Silicon Valley did, and what OpenAI did in the last few years, is they started to blowing up the amount of data and the size of the computers that need to do this training. So we are talking about the full English language internet being fed into these models, books, scientific articles, all of the intellectual property that has been created, and also massive supercomputers that run tens of thousands, even hooked with thousands of computer chips that are the size of dozens, maybe hundreds of football fields. Practically the entire energy demands of cities now. So this is an extraordinary type of AI development that is causing a lot of social labor and environmental harms, and that is why I ultimately evoke this analogy to empire. We would need to put as much energy on the global grid as what is consumed by 2 to 6 the energy consumed annually by the state of California, and that will mostly be serviced by fossil fuels. We're seeing reporting of coal plants which were supposed to retire, but now they cannot. To support the state of center development, we are seeing methane gas turbines, unlicensed ones, being popped up to service these data centers as well. From a freshwater perspective, these data centers need to be trained on fresh water. They cannot be trained on any other type of water because it can corrode the equipment, it can lead to bacterial growth, and most of the time it actually taps directly into a public drinking water supply because that is the infrastructure that has been laid to deliver this clean, fresh water to different businesses and homes. Bloomberg recently have an analysis where they looked at the expansion of these data centers around the world, and 2/3 of them are being placed in water-scarce areas. So they're being placed in communities that do not have access to fresh water. So it's not just the total that we need to be concerned about, but actually the distribution of this infrastructure around the world. One of the reasons why these companies are linking up with the defense industry is because they have spent an extraordinary amount of money in developing these technologies. They're spending hundreds of millions to train these models, and they need to recoup those costs. And there are only so many industries that can give them that kind of payday. And so that's what we're seeing cozying up to the defense industry. We're also seeing Silicon Valley use the US government in their empire-building missions. You could argue that the US government is also trying to use them in their own empire-building ambitions, but certainly these technologies are not designed to be used in sensitive military context. So that when they aggressive push of these companies to try and get them to speed up contracts and integrate their technologies into the military. In Chile under dictatorship for a very long time. And so during that time, most public resources, those were privatized, including water, but because of an anomaly, there's one community in the greater Santiago metropolitan region that actually still has access to a public freshwater resource that services both that community as well as the rest of the country in emergency situations. That is the exact community but what the community told me was they weren't even paying taxes for this because they believed based on reading the documentation that the taxes that Google was paying was in fact where they had registered their offices, their administrative offices, not where they were putting down the data center. So they were not seeing any benefit from the data center directly to that community, and they were seeing no checks placed on the fresh water that this data center would have been allowed to extract. And so these activists, wait a minute, absolutely not. We're not going to allow this data center to come in unless they give us a legitimate reason for why it benefits us. And so they started doing boots on the ground activism, pushing back, knocking on every single one of their neighbors' doors, handing out flyers to the community telling them this company is taking our freshwater resources without giving us anything in return. And so they escalated so dramatically that it escalated to Google Chile. It escalated to Google Mountain View, which by the way have been sent representatives to Truly that only spoke English. But then it eventually escalated to the Chilean government, and the Chilean government now has roundtables where they ask these community residents and the company representatives and representatives from the government to come together to actually discuss how to make data center development more beneficial to the community. And how is it that these, because AI systems are trained on massive amounts of data and their scripts from the internet, you can actually pump that data directly into your hand model because there are a lot of things within our data. It's actually colluded and needs to be. You need to be out here. So this is where the data annotation groups come in. These are middleman firms that hire contract labor to provide to these AI companies commercializing its products and thinking about. Let's put texture operations machines that can spew any kind of text into the hands of millions of users. They realized they needed to have some kind of content moderation. They needed to develop a filter that would wrap around these models and prevent these models from actually spewing racist, hateful, and harmful speech to users. That would not make a very good commercially viable product. And so they contacted this little endurance in Kenya, where the Kenyan workers had to rate their reams of the worst hacks on the internet, as well as AI-generated text, where OpenAI was prompting its own AI models to imagine the worst text to the internet and then telling these Kenyan workers to categorize them in detailed taxonomies of as the sexual content. Is this violent content? How graphic is that violent content in order to teach its filter all the different categories of content that had to block, and this is incredibly uncommon.